ask him if he would address us, because Peter and the OCA has been instrumental in funding some of Lou's work. So I'll turn it over to Peter now. Peter, you're on.
Okay, let me just set up my background here. Okay, well, there's Lou. You can see him in his office, and you can see him in situ, so to speak. Lou is a master of field biology. He really, I've known of his work now for about almost 20 years, I guess. We first heard of Lou, I think, at the instigation of Cindy Hill about 20 years ago. It turns out that Lou and Cindy had gone to the same college in Wisconsin, although not at the same time. And somehow Cindy found out what he was doing and thought he would be interesting to come to the Orchid Society and to get some money from the County Orchid Society Conservation Committee. In the end, he got.
Peter, can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes, please do.
Jack, could you enable recording on the session? I'd like to get Peter's information.
Okay, Stuart. I have a recording going to a file on my computer. I've never done this before, but when this session's over, I'll send you whatever I've got.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay. So that's settled. I guess I'm still on here. It looks like I'm not muted. So where was I? So at the end of, or towards the end of those grants from the county, from the Orchid Society, Lou came to talk in September of 2004. I know that because I looked him up in the newsletter, and gave us a report on what he was doing. And it was really, really marvelous field biology. He spent a lot of time tromping around, and he certainly has done a marvelous job of it. Now, back in college, Lou was actually a physics and math major. I don't know that he took any biology classes, but clearly he got the bug. And it's turned out that in biology, many people, many very productive people have had math and physics backgrounds. And Lou has certainly translated that background into biology very successfully. After Lou was here in September, some of us got together and decided that we should be supporting him to a greater extent. And we formed the Orchid Conservation Alliance. So in many ways, Lou was really the inspiration for forming the Orchid Conservation Alliance, and it's been a huge success in many ways, in many respects, because Lou has kept up the field biology that he does. He's gotten into establishing reserves and being able to support those kinds of things people like to do. So he, in many ways, is responsible for whatever success the Orchid Conservation Alliance has had. He really is a spectacular field biologist, and I'm sure you're going to hear more about that. So I've been to Ecuador. I've seen some of the reserves he's talking about. They are just spectacular places, and I hope that some of you come away with a feeling for that at the end of his talk. So I'm delighted that we could bring Lou here by the internet if we couldn't get him here by airplane. And I look forward to doing this again in the future. So thanks for doing this, Lou, and thanks, Stuart, for inviting him. And now I'll get out of the way and let the show begin.
Thank you, Peter, for that wonderful introduction. And while I've got you here, thank you again for supporting all the conservation work that I've been doing since the very, very beginning. So I really appreciate it. You are responsible for all of this. So let me share the screen. See if I can get this to work. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you have the slide? Is it okay?
I don't see your shared screen.
Hmm. I am pressing shared screen and you would think it would work.
We saw a still picture of a wall and a picture frame or something, or a curtain.
No, that wasn't me, or wasn't what I had intended to show you.
That was Linda's house.
Debbie, do you have any suggestions?
Well, do share screen and then choose, double click on the desktop that you want to share.
Yeah, but that worked when we were testing it, but now nothing happens when I press share screen. Is there something
Able
else?
for that?
Oh, no. Oh, no. I got it.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
You did it.
Yay. Okay, sorry.
There you go.
I'm not a pro at this. At the end, I don't know how you want to do the questions. If you'd like, it's probably best to save the questions till the end.
Yes,
Is that
I
all
think
right with
so.
everyone?
Sure, that's fine. We'll just wait until
Let
the
us save questions till the end. So just make a note if you want to ask a question and we'll do them all at the end. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
For
Well,
now,
so
would everyone make sure you're muted?
So this is the story of all the things that happened thanks to your original Conservation Committee grants that you started giving me in 2000 and 2001. And it's a long story. I'll try not to go too long, but it's been a wonderful springboard to do a lot of interesting work. I live in Baños in Ecuador, right on the edge of the Amazon basin. You can see this obviously is the Amazon basin, and I've been living there since about 1996, 1997. And I came there for other reasons. I was interested in birds at the time, but it was a very fortuitous location, as you'll see shortly. Baños is a town at the foot of an active volcano. You can see that there's a lot of deforested land around it, but nevertheless, in the high mountains around Baños, there was still good virgin forest, which I spent a lot of time exploring. The volcano was active quite often while I lived here. This is one view of it from my house, and I took this from my kitchen window, so it's quite an exciting place to live for a while. Here's a map, a Google Earth view of it. The volcano is here, Baños is here, my house is about here, and this area is the high Interandean Plateau in Ecuador, the dry desert Interandean Valley. It's in the rain shadow of both the Eastern Andes and the Western Andes. No matter which direction the wind comes from, it's in a rain shadow, so it's very dry there. And on this side, not much more than 30 kilometers away, you have the Amazon jungle, the lowland Amazon rainforest, right here. So, and between the Amazon rainforest and the high Interandean desert plateau, you have these parallel chains of mountains forming like fingers into the Rio Pastaza Valley. So that Cerro Pastaza that I showed you during that Debbie showed you during the plant parade, the forum, is named after this river and the province of Pastaza. It's a beautiful place. There's lots of very showy orchids. This is a cliff next to my house that's growing naturally with all these elianthus, which are pollinated by hummingbirds. So there's clouds of hummingbirds around them at the right time of year. And there's one of the most spectacular orchids here is that Certicalum pastaceae that I showed you a minute ago. And the plants are immense, meters and meters across, with inflorescences that are huge. Peter has actually seen this plant in my house in flower, in my yard, I should say, in flower. And it's a pretty spectacular thing. And this is the hybrid that I made the hybrid and then forgot about the pod. And the pod sowed the seeds by itself. And I later found this plant growing near my yard, which must have come from the pod of the hybrid that I made. There's beautiful Cebraelias here, like Cebraelia luororum, named after Carl Luer and his wife. But all those fancy orchids are great, but what really interested me are the tiny little orchids, the Lepanthes in particular. I'm sure most of you know this genus, but it's one of the largest genera of plants in the world. There's 1,000 species of Lepanthes, all Latin American. And Ecuador has 350 species at least, probably more. And the reason these are interesting to me, well, they're beautiful for one thing, and sort of a challenge for a field biologist, because you don't generally spot the flowers. You have to see the leaves, recognize the leaves as the Lepanthes, and then flip over the leaf to see the flower often hidden underneath the leaf. And it's always a wonderful surprise. It's always some fancy, very, very bright colors, very elaborate, complex flowers in spite of their tiny size. I just never grow tired of looking at these Lepanthes. And they're continuously flowered. These are the pedicels of flowers that have fallen off. So they're always in bloom. So that makes them very good for doing field biology. You don't have to go at a particular time. You can almost always identify all of the Lepanthes in an area at any time of the year that you choose to go into a forest. Very wide variety of shapes and colors. Some of you may know that these are pollinated by male fungus gnats, which are mistaking these Lepanthes flowers for female fungus gnats. And they actually mate with this organ right here, which is a perfect imitation of the genitals of the female fungus gnat. And that's how the flower is pollinated. And apparently each Lepanthes species has its own particular fake female genitalia for a particular fungus gnat species. So there's not very many hybrids, and this allows a large number of Lepanthes to live in a single area, a large number of species to live in a single forest without interbreeding. So there's several scientific reasons why these plants are interesting. They're the genus of orchids with the highest number of locally endemic species in Ecuador. And it's surprising, if you think about it, it's surprising that any orchids would have so much endemism. Orchids are some of the best dispersers of any flowering plants. Their seeds, as you know, are dust-like. In the Galapagos, 12 of the 15 orchid species are the same as orchids on the mainland. So there's gene flow across 800 kilometers of open ocean for these orchids. So orchids have the capacity to travel long distances and to overcome barriers, geographical barriers. So why is it that in Ecuador there are so many locally endemic Lepanthes? It's very curious. And in fact, this is true for the whole family. This is a graph of the number of endemic species of plants in Ecuador, according to family. And the orchids make up by far the largest family of endemic plants. 33% of the plants that are endemic to Ecuador are orchids. Just the opposite of what you would think if you just thought about their seed biology and their abilities to disperse. So it's very curious, an interesting scientific question. I hope that by looking carefully at the Lepanthes in the field, I might be able to learn something about the nature of plant endemism and orchid endemism in particular. I also thought that by looking at Lepanthes in the field, I might be able to use these Lepanthes as indicators to guide conservation work. We could find out where the Lepanthes, where most of the endemic Lepanthes were located in this complex geography where I lived. If I climbed every single mountain and mapped all of the Lepanthes species, maybe I would learn something about where we needed to conserve, and might learn something about the nature of endemism itself. And this is the grant that this is the reason why I applied to your conservation committee for my first grants. And as Peter said, we both Cindy and I went to the same university, and I had written in my alumni update that I was interested in orchids and doing orchid studies and discovering new species. And Cindy wrote me back and said I should apply, which I did. And you were kind enough to support me for a total of 5 years. And this is my project that's orchid conservation in the Eastern Andes of Ecuador. And thanks to that, I was able to spend enough time to actually do the work. I wouldn't have been able to do this work without your grants. So, as I said, I spent years climbing every single ridge of every single mountain in this valley, in the Rio Pastaza watershed, to try to map out the distributions of Lepanthes, and in doing so also to discover new species of Lepanthes. And what I found was a very, very definite pattern. Here, for example, is Lepanthes lopheus. And this is where I found it growing, in this side valley here, and in this side valley here, and nowhere else. And both these side valleys are equally distant from the Amazon. And that was a common pattern that, this is the Amazon basin here. And the distributions of Lepanthes formed north-south bands, and they weren't stopped by the deep canyon of the Rio Pastaza. This was not a barrier for them. Here's another species, Lepanthes decurva. It was very rare, only known from a few collections. I found it here and here. Once again, in a north-south band, each population was equally distant from the Amazon basin. And again, the Rio Pastaza, the deep valley of the Rio Pastaza, was not a barrier for seed flow. This is a species that I discovered, Lepanthes ruthiana. And I found it here and here. Again, more or less the same north-south band, although it's a little crooked here because the mountains are a little crooked. But this is a very clear pattern that most of the Lepanthes showed, that the mountains north and south of each other shared the same Lepanthes, and there was very little overlap in the east and west direction. So much so that if you counted how many Lepanthes species were on one mountain, like this one, Mayordomo, and how many were on the next mountain over, about 15 kilometers away, Abitagua, very large numbers of Lepanthes on both mountains, but only 6 species shared. So this showed the incredible local endemism of the Andean basin. And what's the explanation for that? The valley of the Rio Pastaza is the deepest, straightest valley in the Eastern Andes of Ecuador. And it forms a wind tunnel, basically. The winds come off the Amazon, go through that this deep valley, and they drop their water first on the first line of mountains, and every line further west gets less and less rain until you're in this yellow area, which is a desert. The blue is the highest precipitation in Ecuador. Yellow is the driest. And you can see that the little space between my little valley is the sharpest climate gradient in all of Ecuador, from wet to dry. So the orchids apparently were specializing in the microclimates of particular mountain ranges with a great degree of sensitivity. These mountains aren't that different from each other, and yet they hardly share any species of Lepanthes. And it wasn't a problem of dispersal limitation. Nothing stops the seeds from going from here to here, for example. And we saw from my population studies that they freely cross this deep valley, but they don't cross this little valley. And the reason is because the climate of each of these mountains is a little bit different. So it was very exciting. That was one of the main products of my research under your grants. And the other product was the discovery of over 50 new species of orchids. Most of them, many of them Lepanthes, and also many of them in another genus, which I'll get to later, Tegia. And this is a picture of Lepanthes murriana in situ. These are tiny flowers. This is one of the first species I discovered. And these are, we would call these mosses if we weren't very careful, but actually these are liverworts. These are leafy liverworts. Almost everything that we call moss in the cloud forest or the moss forest isn't moss, it's actually liverworts. So when you added up all the locally endemic species in the Pastaza Valley, including the new ones that I discovered, it turns out there were more locally endemic species in that one valley than in all of the Galapagos Islands combined. And people had not really thought much about this valley as a conservation priority, but my work showed that, thanks to your grant, that this was a very, very special area, globally special as the Galapagos Islands, and at least for plants. And scientifically, even more special, because on the Galapagos, it's easy to understand why there are different species on different islands. There's geographic isolation. But in my valley, there's not the same kind of geographic isolation. So how does this kind of speciation happen? It's very curious. But my research not only showed that this was an important area for conservation, I also learned that, well, by living there, that the forests were being destroyed. These very special forests were disappearing pretty fast, mostly for agriculture. And that was a very serious, there would be a serious loss for the whole world if these forests disappeared. So my friends and I in Ecuador got together. Well, first I tried everything I could to get other people interested in buying some of this land to conserve it. The government, I asked the National Park Service to enlarge their national parks. They were excited to do it, but they didn't have any money. I tried to get the Baños government to enlarge to make municipal reserves, but they didn't have any money for that either. So finally, we figured we had to do it ourselves. And my friends and I joined together and created this foundation called Ecominga. Minga is a Quechua word, which means people banding together to do something for the common good. So that's why we named it Ecominga. And around the same time, a few years before, right as Ecominga was getting started, as Peter just explained, the Orchid Conservation Alliance also got started, founded by Peter and by Mary Gerritsen and Ron Kaufman and Steve Beckendorf and Rosario in Brazil. And I think there are a few other people at the beginning. Those are the people who I most dealt with. And they were interested in finding out what they could do about conservation. And it was a synergy of timing and willpower, because I had just what we needed to do: buy land, buy strategically chosen land, buy these centers, these unknown, unprotected centers of orchid endemism that I and others were discovering around the world, and that weren't in protected areas. So this was our mission. It dovetailed nicely, their mission and Ecominga's mission. And since then, we've expanded our support. We started building reserves first with the help of the Orchid Conservation Alliance, and eventually with all of these international groups, which have provided us with a lot of funding. But it was critically important to have that start from the Orchid Conservation Alliance to get us started and get a foot in the door to these other sources of funding. They were willing to take the risk on a completely unknown foundation, a new foundation that had no track record. So I'm eternally grateful for them. So with that bounce from Orchid Conservation Alliance, we began to get worldwide publicity and worldwide support, including from famous people like David Attenborough. I went to London and named a species after Sir David, and he has been instrumental in helping us raise money for Ecominga and for our work. So we've built this enormous system of reserves. Here's that volcano, here's Banos, here's the dry inter-Andean Valley, and here's the Amazon jungle. And we've basically protected something on each of those bands of mountains where I was discovering new species. And the green areas are national parks, which are, like in the United States, they're typically restricted to high elevation areas that nobody wants. Also very important for biodiversity, but the lower elevations were actually where the biodiversity was higher. And these were left unprotected, and they were highly threatened. So this is why we base all of our reserves, almost all of our reserves, start from a high national park and go down to the lowlands, or to the lowest locally available land. And the very first project was one that we did with the Orchid Conservation Alliance, the Rio Anzu Reserve. This is a weird limestone area in what is otherwise a clay and volcanic lowland forest right on the eastern edge of the Andes. And it's an uplift of an ancient seabed. This part of Ecuador used to be under an ocean. And as the Andes rose up here, the water ran off, and there's a little strip of limestone right on that got uplifted with the Andes and is exposed right at the base of the eastern Andes. And as any of you know who garden, soil pH is really important to plants. So there are many specialized endemic plants that live just in that band of limestone soil at the base of the Andes right here. So we started our Anzu Reserve right about here. I can't see where I'm pointing because there's your speakers in the way. I guess I can drop that there. Okay, there's the Amazon and the Rio Anzu. And it's full of Phragmipedium piercii. It's a very common species, a limestone specialist. You may or may not know how it's pollinated. These green dots and brown spots are imitating a colony of aphids, some winged and some juveniles. And a syrphid fly lands on this flower, thinking it's going to lay its eggs in this colony of aphids so that the maggots can eat the aphids. And it slips into the flower and gets trapped and has to come out through tubes inside the flower and pass under the anther and the stigma, thus pollinating the orchid. We have huge colonies of them right along the river. And as always, and one of the lessons of this talk is that if you're conserving orchids, if you're conserving unusual orchids, you're almost certainly also conserving a lot of unusual plants from other groups. And this is my friend Rob Gradstein, who's a bryophyte specialist. And I took him to see the Phragmipedium plants along the Rio Anzu, but he was interested in the mosses and the liverworts, and he discovered on the roots of these, on the rocks covering the roots of these Phragmipediums were a new species of liverwort. So this is the new species of liverwort. And as far as we know, it's only been found growing in the Rio Anzu and no place else in the world, although it's very likely that it does grow somewhere else. Rob Gradstein named it after me. Here is a new genus of orchids that I found growing on the limestone cliffs. This, at first I thought the leaves were Phragmipedium leaves, but eventually it flowered and turned out to be a new genus that no one had classified before. Very unusual flowers, non-resupinate. The lips are on top of the flowers. Gerardo Salazar and I published it as we named it after the indigenous language of the area, Quechua. And of course, he did DNA analysis on it. Another new species from the area, Stellulabium, now Telepogon. Stig Dahlstrom and I spent a lot of time in the area, and we discovered new species of Masdevallia, like this Masdevallia stigii and this Masdevallia louii. And we discovered this tiny little Lepanthopsis. This is a ballpoint pen, ordinary big ballpoint pen, to give you some idea of the scale. So you can see why some of these things haven't been discovered before. Not only did we protect interesting orchids there, but also lots of other interesting plants. We rediscovered this Gesneria that had been lost to science for 150 years. And there's an endemic Bommeria there, weird fungi, lots of other things which I don't have time to talk about. So that was a first reserve. Let's move now. Let me show you something about all the other reserves that we created here. I'll have to go very quickly or it'll take too long, but I just want to give you a sense of how diverse they are and how much endemism there is, not only in orchids, but also in all the other groups of plants. The orchids turn out to be great indicators for conservation. So here's the Rio Zuniac Reserve. This is my favorite reserve, and this is on the first mountain range facing the Amazon basin. So it's the wettest of all these mountains. It's this set of properties here. This is the Rio Zuniac Reserve on this side of the river. Beautiful mountains, very steep, very rugged, very poorly explored. Nevertheless, farmers coming in over here and pastures, this is all deforested over here. So it's sort of on the edge of the agricultural frontier. Granite substrate, unusual for the Andes. We built a scientific station deep inside so that we could study better the deep interior of that forest. We have occasional dinner guests like the spectacled bear, who came to dinner very regularly for a while. That's in the wrong place. Sorry. this is what the forest looks like. Beautiful, beautiful forest. Very mossy, full of bromeliads, dripping with orchids, as you might expect, being so wet. And we discovered many, many new species of orchids there, not just tiny ones. Here's a new Cebraelia, very similar to Cebraelia gloriosa from the Western Andes, but not quite. Very fancy. Big flowers as big as a cattleya. A big Maxillaria, new one. Lots of weird new things as well. This is a Pantheva. Campylocentrum, related to the Vandas, one of the few New World Vandaceous orchids. Dracula, this is a Dracula vespertilio, very common. And this is a Dracula that's endemic to that mountain, Dracula fuligifera, with a perfect fungus lip. Smells like a mushroom too. And here's a new Dracula species that I discovered there. Very beautiful. We're currently describing it. Endemic Masdevallia del Hierro. A really interesting Masdevallia that was briefly put in its own genus because I discovered that it had an actively mobile lip. If you touched the lip right here, the lip would spring shut like that. And it would stay that way for about 20 minutes and then relax. Very much like a poroglossum or some of the other motile-lipped pleurothalids, but a completely different physical mechanism. So that this active lip has evolved 4 different times in the pleurothalidae, each time using a completely different closing mechanism. But DNA showed that this was something that recently evolved. This is clusters with deep inside all the other Masdevallias. So it really is just a Masdevallia. Scaphocephalum jostiae, Tegia Zeus. This is a beautiful, fantastic, complex Tegia. Here's a close-up of the lip. And here's a close-up of the column. The anthers are under here, stigma are here. Really fancy when you look at these things close, the complexity is amazing. What was then a Trichosalpinx, now Pseudolepanthes zuniagensis, endemic to that valley. Oh, actually, we've just recently learned that wasn't zuniagensis, but a new species apparently, but we haven't classified it yet. A new Lepanthes. The interesting thing here isn't just that there are new species, but that there are evolutionary radiations of new species, closely related new species that are all each other's closest relatives, all growing in the same forest. Here's a common widespread Lepanthes, mucronata, and 2 new species that I discovered there growing in the same forest. So we're having what biologists call sympatric speciation, apparently. Species sprouting up without any geographic isolation at all. It's very unusual. Here's another example of 3 closely related species of Lepanthes, all recently discovered, or well, this one was discovered in 1990 by Alex Hertz and Stig Dahlstrom, and these 2 I discovered. They grow together, yet they're each other's closest relatives. There are also many new things that we classified as Lepanthes back when I started, but these turn out, these chain-like leaved pendant tiny things that we used to call Lepanthes are actually Andinea. Mark Wilson showed that clearly, as did Alec Pridgeon, and we've since separated these into Andinea. This is what they look like in the field. They're chains of hanging leaves, very mossy, bryophyte, liverworty. Look at how complex all the stuff is on their leaf. And it turns out that there's a lot of splitting that still needs to be done in these tiny species. People haven't paid enough attention to them. It turns out that Lepanthes pneumolaria, one of the widespread, highly variable Lepanthes, now Andinea, actually consists of at least 4 different species. People thought there were geographic variants over the wide range of the species, but I found one place in southern Ecuador where all 4 of these forms grew together in the same forest without interbreeding. So that proves that biologically, these are 4 distinct species. And I'm currently describing them. And DNA done by Mark Wilson, DNA analysis proved that I was correct and that these are distinct species. Not only are small things new in this forest, but even the biggest things can often be new to science in this marvelous forest. Here's a new species of magnolia, the biggest thing in the forest. And there weren't just one new species of magnolia, there were 2 new species of magnolia there, described by Antonio Vasquez, the world expert on magnolias, who happened to be teaching at a university right next to the study area. And so he was able to come and visit these species and describe them. Another new species of tree, one of the fanciest trees in the world, I would say, new to science. And another new species in the same family, same genus, Mariania. This is a melastome, one of the large plant families of the neotropics. This we just published, my co-authors and I just published last month. And another new species in the same genus also just published this last month. Beautiful, beautiful things. New Bommeria, not new, but excuse me, a narrowly endemic Bommeria, critically endangered, which only lives in the Rio Zuniac and Mera area. And of course, all the fantastic other organisms, a fantastic katydid, amazing amphibians, new species of frogs, fantastic snakes, beautiful cats, endangered mammals like the mountain tapir, woolly monkeys. These are now so tame because of our protection and our guards that the guards climbed the trees that the monkeys were in to take these pictures, and the monkeys didn't care. They just hung out while our guards took the pictures. But they can't be too chilled out because this eagle hunts them. And this is a giant eagle called the Andean Eagle or black and chestnut eagle. This is a juvenile. And it's huge claws. These can carry a monkey through the air, a big monkey. This is the adult, my painting of an adult. And we have these nesting in that reserve. This is another endangered species. And it's very exciting to have these things in the reserve. So now we move from this chain of mountains to the next chain. And as you heard from my introduction, these have an almost completely different set of species of Lepanthes than, that's this set here, than this set in the Rio Zuniac. This is our Rio Machai Reserve. This is the Nature Trek Reserve, and this is the Cerro Candelaria Reserve. Really, it's one biological unit, and it unites these 2 national parks in a biological corridor. So it has value also for general conservation purposes for mammals to maintain gene flow between these 2 national parks. But even if it didn't serve that function, it serves to protect the most amazing variety of orchids. Here's a view of it from the side, crossing the valley of the Rio Pastaza. Big trees, beautiful elfin forest. There's a person right there. We built a station in the middle of that forest as well to help us, as a base, to help us study these mountains, because it's very difficult to study. These are very, very remote mountains. Having a station there helps a lot. This is our highest reserve. It goes up to 3,800 meters, so maybe over 12,000 feet. And it's that's Paramo, alpine grassland at the top, like this. This is the very top of the reserve, way above the clouds. And this is the top of the southern end of the reserve, the top of the mountain on the other side of the Rio Pastaza, Cerro Mayordomo. And a paramo covered with bromeliads. And this forest has the world's smallest platystelli. This is This is 1 millimeter. Its own endemic Lepanthes that I discovered, like this one, and many others. A new species of Maxillaria, new species of Epidendrum. My friend John Clark, who's a Gesneriad specialist, came there with his students and spent about less than a week. And in one trail, he discovered 4 new species of Gesneriads. Every time he went a few hundred meters up in elevation on that trail, he discovered a new Gesneriad, which is his specialty. He was pretty surprised because he had thought there were only a couple of species left in Ecuador that he didn't know about. But here he found 4 that he didn't know about in one short walk. This is the tree that I named after Sir David Attenborough, another melastome. And there's also magnolias there in this forest. New frogs, including the most spectacular frog discovery of the last 10 years. Look at this thing. This is a big frog, about half the size of a human hand, and it's neurotoxic. The person who carried it for a while. His arms started numbing up and tingling, and it stayed that way for some time. But he was fine after that. Amazing discovery. This is the male of the same species. That endangered monkey-eating eagle lives here as well, as do fancy birds like this mountain toucan, spectacled bear, puma, mountain tapir. So now let's move to very quickly to the very last set of mountains, this set here. And once again, this set also has its own endemic Lepanthes. This is part of one of the reserves that we created. This is created with the help of an ecotourism company called Nature Trek in Britain. They specialize in nature tours, and they use part of their income to balance the carbon of their business. They protect a certain number of hectares every year, and they've chosen us as the beneficiary of that. So we have built a large set of reserves from their carbon balancing money. Very nice, very, very interesting project. And this is one of the endemic Lepanthes to that area, Lepanthes yanganatensis, named after the national park, and Lepanthes binaria, which is not endemic to there, but almost, and a new species, Lepanthes elytrifera. So lots of incredible diversity in a very short distance. But I'd spent most of my field work at lower elevations, but when I got to higher elevations in like the very tops of these mountains, this is the top of Cerro Mayordomo, now the highest point of our Machai Reserve. It turned out that there was a whole nother radiation of orchids, closely related orchids, completely unknown to science, completely unsuspected on the tops of these most remote mountains. It took me years to figure out how to get up these mountains. These were very difficult to reach, and they demanded long camping trips, long, wet, cold, miserable camping trips. But what amazing things I found at the tops of those mountains. When I started getting above 3,100 meters, I found around my feet these weird orchid leaves creeping through the moss at my feet, and weird flowers like this. They were pleurothalids, but I couldn't even tell what genus they were, and I was supposed to be an expert in pleurothalids at that time, and I had no idea what they were. And the weirdest thing, well, they were long creeping plants like this, and there wasn't just one species of them. In 1 square meter of moss, I found 4 of these, 4 different, very different species of these strange pleurothalids. There was this one, which is an incredibly beautiful, elegant flower. And then there was this one, and this one, and this one, which came in all kinds of colors. These are all the same species, these last three. So really a surprising diversity of things that I had no idea what they were. I came down from the mountain and sent pictures to Carl Luhr, and who was the world specialist in chlorothalates. And he told me that they were, seemed to be a new subgenus of a tiny genus called Tegia. Tegia had, up to that time, only been known from four or five species in Colombia and Ecuador, nowhere else in the world. And here in 1 square meter of moss, I had doubled the size of the genus. That was very, very exciting. And so I kept going back up to these mountains, that mountain in particular, and kept discovering new species. There was this one, but this one was actually discovered by one of my students, Andy Shepard, and so it's named. I named it after him, Tegia Treborchiae. This is the biggest one so far, and then this one. My student Kelsey Huisman just recently discovered this one on that mountain. She's doing her PhD work on this group of orchids. Fascinating textures too, if you look closely at them. This is the alcohol specimen of her new Tegia. And she also discovered this new one, which I don't have a good picture of in life. She took this with her phone, but it's clearly a new species. Lots of amazing new species. So what's going on here? Does every mountaintop have its own secret hidden Tegia radiation on top of it? If so, this area is an incredible treasure of evolutionary history. It took me a while to figure out how to get up to these other mountains. When I did, though, get up to the next mountain over. So the first mountain is this one, the Machai Reserve, Cerro Mayordomo. The next mountain over that I could get to was this set. And when I finally got there, I discovered a whole new set of Tegias. There was this new species, this new species, this new species, this new species, new one, new one. This was discovered by several of these were discovered by my students, Andy Shepard and Scott Grossman, who spent 6 months here trying to map out trying to visit all the Tegia sites that I had visited and carefully map and sample them. So, this is a really fancy one. So really exciting, astounding, really. And that was just 2 mountaintops. My homeland is full of mountaintops, most of them completely unexplored. So I had 2 students once who asked me for an independent study project that they could do that would be really challenging. And I said, oh yeah, I have just the thing for you. Go to these previously unvisited mountains, spend a week there, collect all the Tegias and tell me what you find. Show me what you find. So they said it was the hardest thing they'd ever done in their lives. One of the women lost her toenail from the walking through deep, cold, wet mud. And they one guy almost died of hypothermia. But the person who was with him, the local person who was with him, made him drink Tabasco sauce, and that started his metabolism, and he was able to continue his field work. So that was these mountains here. And when they came back, they did come back, both of them are still alive, and they dumped their Tegia specimens on my apartment floor. And everything they had found was new to science. There was this one, this one, this one, this one, which is the same as this one whom I'm going to name after the woman who lost her toenail. So the pattern here so far is a big set of species here, a quite different set of species here with a few shared, and then a completely different set here. That left this mountain as a particularly interesting, obvious target for investigation. And this was a very, very tedious, very hard mountain to get to. This is the top of it from the nearest road. So you have to walk. It was a 9-day camping trip for me to get to the top of that mountain and back over very difficult terrain. But oh, it was so worth it. That's this mountain right here called Cerro Candelaria, which is now, as you can see from this map, is now we own it. But at the time that I did this field work, it was unknown and wild land. And I found all of the species that my students had found on the neighboring mountain and an equal number of new species. The new ones including this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. That's the same as the previous one. These two are the same. This one and this one. And so here's a family portrait of some of the new species according to scale. So you can see that there's color variation, size differences, wild shape differences, but they're all clearly cut from the same mold. They're all Tigias. And my friends at the University of Florida at Gainesville, Mark Whitten, the late Mark Whitten, Lorraine Andara, and Kurt Neubig did DNA analysis on them along with Alec Pridgeon and Eric Rothacker. And we found that these Tigias that I had discovered were, well, here's the Tigias, the previously discovered Tigias, the previously known Tigias. And then the Baños Tigias are here in their own branch. So it's a clade, a true isolated clade that appears to have evolved in place here in my watershed. Not very closely related to the other Tigias. And later we were able to do a dated phylogeny of these Tigias to see how recent this evolutionary radiation is. And it turns out that all of these species radiated from a common ancestor in just 2.5 million years. This is a calibration done on fossils, on dated fossils. And that's a shockingly rapid evolution. Since they did this calibration, I've begun to analyze this, think about the statistics a bit more. And I think that the way that biologists have been calibrating phylogenetic trees of orchids and other organisms may have missed an important statistical factor that causes them to underestimate the ages of these trees, and sometimes underestimating them by a lot, like by 100%. So I'm currently writing a paper on that. We'll see how that applies to this radiation. So it could be that this could be older than the standard techniques reveal, and the standard techniques throughout the tree of life may be older than we think. But in any case, still relatively fast radiation and way more interesting than the famous Galapagos finches. It's obvious why these are different species, how this could happen because of the geographic isolation. But in my mountains, in these mountains that we have, that we've bought and preserved, we have up to 16 new species of Tigia on a single peak with no geographic isolation. So how did that happen? We really have little idea how that could happen. And that's one of the reasons for preserving these forests. These are evolutionary laboratories, even more interesting than the Galapagos. And we can still learn something deep about evolution if we can protect these forests and figure out how these radiations happen. If these radiations disappear, we'll probably never figure out what's going on in the process of, about the process of speciation in plants. There's also, these plants turn out to be really neat. I don't have time to talk about them, but they have very rough, irregular leaves with little volcanoes on top, and little craters, and chloroplasts down here, and empty air cells here. These volcanoes are similar to the volcanoes, the rough leaves, the pustules that you see on the leaves of poroglossums. Those of you who grow poroglossums probably have exactly these same things. And the microstructure of them is very interesting. It appears that there are fungi or something growing in each crater. That's why they're black. And there seems to be a gas channel through here, and chloroplasts clustering around the tube. So very, very strange. I don't have time to talk more about them, but if anyone has questions at the end, I'll be happy to talk more about them. But very fun to inspect. So as I said, these tigias have no species in common between each side of the Rio Pastasa, a completely different pattern from the Lepanthes and most of the other orchids. I should add that Lepanthes don't grow at these elevations. It's a complete turnover, not only in genus, but also in biogeographical patterns. Once you get above about 3,100 meters, everything changes. And so it becomes necessary to protect those peaks as well. Done so by buying the mountain with the most tigia, with the highest tigia diversity. Conserving these forests isn't just about buying land. These are our park rangers, wonderful people, Jesus Recalde, Santiago Recalde, Jordi Salazar, and Tito Recalde. All of our guards since the beginning have belonged to this one family, excellent family of field naturalists, wonderful people. Everyone who comes to visit us always really enjoys getting to know our guards. And they have a hard job. They have to make this forest accessible to clumsy gringos like myself. They can climb up this cliff like nothing. Now, at least in my age, I have to use a ladder. So they carry these aluminum ladders or other things 2 or 3 days into the forest and make cliffs accessible to us and to visiting scientists. We also are working to get the young children in the families around our reserves to start appreciating nature. Their parents typically did not regard nature as something special. It was just something to be cleared so that they could plant crops. But the kids are really getting excited about nature. We take them on field trips and let them stay at our research stations, and they get a kick out of it, and they care about nature. We also try to get money pumped into the local communities by having our students and visitors, when possible, stay with the families of that live in our communities, and pay the family a small amount for room and board. The family gets all of it, and it's a two-way street. Both the family and the students get a really interesting education. The students learn about Ecuadorian life, and the family, it's a sort of secret eco propaganda. Our students go into the forest during the day and come back with all this excitement and stuff on it, many pictures and videos of all the things they saw in their telephones, and they show this to the family and to the family's kids, and they start to see, the family starts to see how special these forests are through this sort of stealth approach of environmental education, not in a classroom, but living with somebody who's really excited about the nature that they're seeing. That has worked miracles in this community. So as we succeeded in protecting the biodiversity of the Rio Pastasa watershed, we started widening our scope. And we were asked by the University of Basel in Switzerland to try to try to do something to protect Ecuador's endemic Dracula orchids. And so, in collaboration with Dracula specialists like Luis Baquero and Inayat and several other people, we realized that this area right in the north of Ecuador, right on the Colombian border, had no protected areas around it, and yet it was perhaps the world's center of Dracula diversity, and also, incidentally, Lepanthes diversity and many other groups as well. And it was not close to any protected area. So this became our next project. I'll have to leave this Mandariaca Reserve for later for the questions, because it's a wonderful reserve, but I can't talk about everything. I'm interested in talking about the Dracula Reserve because the Orchid Conservation Alliance plays such a key role in creating it. Right from the start, the Orchid Conservation Alliance was with us trying to raise money to buy the land for this reserve. The University of Basel gave us an initial startup. So we bought, in fact, 4 different units of the reserve. We now own, after many years of work with the University of Basel, the Orchid Conservation Alliance, and the Rainforest Trust, who matched the funds that the Orchid Conservation Alliance and the University of Basel donated to them. With their help, we were able to buy, at right now, about 2,000 hectares of really interesting forest. Here's Luis Baquero, the Dracula expert that helped us set up this reserve. He's very passionate about orchids and goes to great lengths to discover and photograph them. This is a very endangered area where we make this reserve. The Dracula Reserve is up here. The lower slopes are completely destroyed and they're on fire. I can see a line of fire working its way down the mountain in this case. I've had the honor of being visited by the many people from the Orchid Conservation Alliance at the Dracula Reserve. This is Spyro Kosamenicus, Kathy McCord, Mary Gerritsen, myself, our driver, and Steve Beckendorf. We had a great time, but a very wet time. I think everyone's cameras ended up being crippled by the end of the trip because it was so wet, but we had a great time. It's a very beautiful forest. Draculas are fascinating. They're everywhere. Many beautiful species. This is Dracula andriete. This is Dracula Treborchiae. This was discovered in cultivation in Europe, and its native habitat was unknown, but it turns out that this reserve is its native habitat. A new species, Dracula trigonopetala, discovered by Luis Baquero and Gary Myers. Dracula psyche, and a host of recently discovered and new Lepanthes. Alex Hertz discovered this Lepanthes nautilus in that area before our reserve was located there. This was one of the things that drew my attention to this reserve, was Alex Hertz's discoveries of 5 new species of Lepanthes on one mountain in this area, and we now own that mountain. Lepanthes meniscifera, beautiful Lepanthes. Another beautiful Lepanthes, Manabina, or Datsonia, I forget. Here's a new Platystelli, which I named Platystelli Baqueroi, after Luis Baquero. One of the prettiest poroglossums, Poroglossum Eduardia. A new poroglossum, Poroglossum rauii. And by the way, there's a poroglossum in description that will be named after Peter Tobias, in honor of all the help that he has given to conservation, orchid conservation in Ecuador and the world. Here's Pescatoria leimanii, one of the fanciest orchids there. And our the rarest Ecuadorian orchid. We own the entire Ecuadorian population of Phragmipedium fisheri. Right there, beautiful cliff with not only adult plants, but we've recently did a survey of the young plants, and Marco Montero did the survey, and he found lots of young plants as well. So this is a healthy population. There are also Phragmipedium hertzii in the area. We have not yet managed to purchase a tract that has this species, but I hope we soon will. Here's Peter and Steve photographing Odontoglossum cirrhosum. And like all of our reserves, that's full of beautiful birds as well. This is a plate-billed mountain toucan, and it was a really beautiful bird showing us all his patterns. And the monkey-eating eagle, the black and chestnut eagle, and new and recently rediscovered frogs that have been lost to science, like this one, Rebo olalae, and a new species of Adelopus. Excuse me, not a new species, but a species that had been thought to be extinct in Ecuador. Adelopus coinii was recently rediscovered there. So very exciting place. And here, just like everywhere else, you can't just buy the land. You have to work, you have to help, you have to be a partner with the communities that live around the reserve. And here, thanks to the Orchid Conservation Alliance, in particular Mary Garrettson, and who organized a fundraising drive to raise money to buy food for the people who were stuck in this economic crisis caused by the COVID virus. Mary and the Orchid Conservation Alliance, and then in addition, the Rainforest Trust and Basel and some other friends, Judith Rapek, numerous other people came together and helped us help this community. Here they are socially distancing as they collect their rations in a very remote area of this reserve. So that's the easy stuff to talk about, but there were also some more complex and more abstract fruits of all of this research. I'm not going to talk at all about them now, but if there is anyone who's interested, they can ask me during the question and answer session. It turned out, as I worked on this issue of diversity and phylogeny and stuff like that, it turned out that I found that biologists were mismeasuring diversity and mismeasuring similarity between forests, and finally also mismeasuring genetic differentiation and genetic similarity between groups. And so I started writing articles using my math to try to fix some of the problems in these fields. So I wrote an article, many articles which I can give to anybody who's interested in looking, proposing new methods for measuring and quantifying diversity. And it turned out that the problems in genetics were so deep that they affected our theories of what factors caused speciation, what genetic and demographic factors permitted divergence between populations. It turns out that the standard population genetics theories about that were wrong because of mathematical misconceptions. And I found the right way to do it, and hopefully that sheds some light on the speciation process. So with that, I'm going to end and thank you. Thanks for your patience. Sorry for the whirlwind tour. I wish I could talk, I would talk for hours about almost any one of those topics if you let me, but I'm controlling myself. So thanks. And if you have questions,
Thank you, Lou. That's great.
Do you want to unshare the screen?
Yeah, that was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, wonderful.
I haven't been able to unshare the screen. Oh yeah,
Uh,
there. You see, I got it.
Oh,
Okay.
Yay.
So does anyone have any questions?
Ooh.
So, I mean, the who is all your work. All of the stuff that I've been trying to speed through is a consequence of those initial donations, those initial grants of the Conservation Committee. So thanks a lot.
Well, this was just amazing and fascinating to see. I've been supporting it, but I didn't really get what was really going on. And to see the forest and have it laid out so clearly as the importance of the terrain and you know what makes these areas special was really great. I'm thrilled to have listened to this talk. It's just wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Lou, it sounds like you were surprised at the diversity that you found once you got into it. Is
Yeah.
that true?
I didn't hear the tail end of the question. Can you unmute?
It sounds like you were surprised at the diversity and the complexity of the distributions that you found that you didn't anticipate. Is that correct?
Yes, well, first I was surprised that there were this many new species of Lepanthes in that one small valley, because people had worked in that valley a lot. Carl Luer and others had spent a lot of time in that valley studying the Lepanthes. There were a lot of collections. It was a well-known area, and yet no one went very far from the road. And this seems to be typical. In fact, my friend Lorena Andara made a study of this phenomenon. She plotted all of the collections of orchids in Ecuador in relation to the roads, and almost all of the collections are clustered around roads. And orchids don't necessarily grow next to the roads, especially in a topography like mine. The steep, high peaks are really where a lot of the diversity is. And the people who just collect on roads miss all of that, unless the road happens to take a very lucky horseshoe around some particular ridge. But most of the terrain in my area is too steep for roads. And that's precisely the kind of terrain that interacts closely with the topography, with the wind and the rain to make special microclimates for orchids. So it's really important to get away from the roads. That's the bottom line. And the Tigias were a complete shock. I had no one imagined that there would be 30 or more new species of Tigias on the tops of those mountains. I had never suspected that. No one suspected that.
Is there any hope of being able to cultivate any of these species in the US in a hobbyist situation?
You know, you guys are such good growers that I bet you can. But there's some disadvantages of trying to grow them in their habitat like I do. I have had terrible luck cultivating the Tigias because they're immediately set upon by every aphid and every slug and every katydid that's out there. They're I don't know how they must. I'm willing to bet that the insects are what limit their distribution, and they only grow above 3,100 meters. And I think there's something keeping them from growing below those elevations. But you guys who have Tigias though have a particularly difficult climate. They freeze every night. So you're going to have to duplicate that.
Well, you just
Not
need,
not all of the species freeze every night, but the species in the Paramo, the highest ones we found are at 3,800 meters. That's 12,000 feet. That freezes every night in the tropics. So,
We'll call it tropics.
oh yeah, well, it's geographically it's a tropics. We're right on the equator, but you know, elevation matters, obviously.
What are the biggest differences between the ranges that you were telling us about from the distance from the Amazon to the plateau? What's the climate change in that? Is it climate or something else?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
You showed us bands going north to south that were similar across the river valley.
Yes, yeah.
And there were bands on a regular basis, 10 miles or 20
Right.
miles.
Yes, yeah. Those were similar climates, similar microclimates, because those chains were equally distant from the Amazon. I wasn't saying that those are the only relationships like that. I was making a generalization. Any point, all of the distributions are roughly north-south bands. Wherever you are in that gradient, that precipitation gradient, the bands will be north and south. Because
primarily
the
precipitation that is making the bands.
Yeah, exactly. It's a continuous phenomenon. There's not specific bands at a particular distance from the Amazon. Everything has their own distance from the Amazon, but the distances are, the ranges are north-south. But every species has a different north-south band, a slightly different north-south band.
How many students do you have working with you?
Oh, it's quite variable. Now I have none thanks to the virus, but normally I work with something called the School for International Training. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. They offer undergraduates from small, typically liberal arts colleges an opportunity to go abroad for a semester and take a semester learning biology and Spanish. And the person who directs that program is a board member of our foundation, Ecominga. And so every semester I give a talk to their students, and some fraction of them chooses to do independent study projects in our reserves. So every semester I have up to 6 students doing something in our reserves. That's at the undergraduate level. And I also occasionally have PhD level students, like now Kelsey Huisman, who wrote an article in the last issue of Orchids, AOS Bulletin, about her work. That's unusual. I don't usually have PhD level students, but it's nice when I have. And, she's been coming back here since I think 2012, when she was an undergraduate. I think it was 2012. She came here as an undergraduate and fell in love with the place and kept coming back.
Can you comment on the impact of global climate change on the reserves and what you've noticed?
Yeah, what I've noticed is it's sad. I kick myself every day because I didn't start taking rigorous statistical baseline data when I first started this work 20 years ago. If I had, I would be so much more well-informed about, and to answer your question. Unfortunately, all I have is anecdotal observations. But what seems to be happening is, in our area, droughts are more frequent and longer. And this has a drastic effect on Lepanthes orchids. You know, those of you who grow pleurothalids, you know that especially Lepanthes, water is really critical. And especially if it's sunny out, you can't have many days of drought or they'll die. And so, and I've learned from moving plants around in my study area. I've collected plants from the front line of mountains, the wettest chain of mountains, and put them at the same elevation on the mountain where I currently live, right near Baños, which is a drier set of mountains, and they do just fine for years. And then there'll come one year where there's just a long drought and I'm not home to water them, and they die. But otherwise, they require no care at all, no watering, no nothing, for years at a time. So I'm convinced that weather events are what controls the distributions of these orchids. The adults are perfectly fine. If you could just give them water about once every 5 years at the critical times when they need it, they would survive here and multiply here. But because we have an increasing severity of droughts as you go from east to west on these chains, you cut out orchids.
What do you attribute the north-south distribution across that deep valley to? The east-west distribution appears to be rainfall and wind, but how did those orchids get across that valley north to south?
That's a kind of good question. But there are occasional times when the wind is not coming from the east. Usually it is a steady wind from the east, but on cold mornings, sometimes the wind comes off the high Interandean plateau and is briefly reversed for the first few hours of the day. So, and then there's turbulence and occasional storms and things. So you can occasionally get seeds going across that valley.
Can you talk a little bit about your process of land acquisition and also maintaining legal rights to the land that you've bought?
Sure. It's complicated and sometimes extremely complicated and tiresome and tedious. It takes sometimes years to get all the title issues sorted out. The land that we're buying is typically owned by colonists who either inherited it from their parents or themselves colonized this land. They're typically elderly and typically would like to get out of agriculture and sell their land. But the titles are complicated. Some of these titles are so old. These predate good maps and predate GPSs, of course. So the titles describe the property boundaries like in very general terms using natural landmarks. A tree with an A carved in it is one boundary, for example, a corner. And the property might go up, the title deeds say the property goes up to the snows of Tungurahua, the snows of our volcano, without specifying what that means. And the snows are, and that's one thing that's changed a lot with climate change also. Our snow line has receded tremendously. But these are vague. Oh, and almost all of the people here have titles which specify a particular length of land, a particular width at the base of their properties, at the bottom of the hill where people live, and they say up to the snows of Tungurahua, up to the tops of the mountains. But you can't lay can't lay rectangular strips all on the same mountain without having them overlap at the top. And all of the title deeds say it's a property 300 feet wide up to the snows of Tungurahua. And the next one says the same thing. And the next one says the same thing. And they're all going up to the same peak. So we have endless arguments everybody thinks their property has to be the one that has, that's 300 meters wide all the way to the top of Tungurahua and cuts off everybody else's properties. And so we have very, very complicated negotiations. Often we have to negotiate with multiple property owners at once and just tell them that they'll just have to let us take care of the overlaps, and otherwise we're not going to buy anybody's property. And so with all 3 or 4 of them in our hands, we can sort out these overlaps. We can sort of order the overlaps to be fixed.
And what about just sort of holding on to the property over time in terms of stability with the government and nationalization issues and the like?
That's always tricky. We're doing everything we can to minimize the possibility that might happen. A few years ago, there was a movement in the government to confiscate big land holdings. But there was an exception for land that was for conservation. So, and then there was an attempt to tax big holdings with a punitive tax, like very, very unpayable tax if you had more than a certain number of hectares. But that, luckily, people forgot about that. And also there was another way out using conservation. The government was willing to support conservation in their policies. So we have all kinds of protections now. We've declared our forest a bosque protector, a protected forest in the Rio Zuniac and Candelaria. We're trying to incorporate the Dracula Reserve into similar things. That one will be a municipal protected area. The local city government is willing to take that into their system of protected areas, not as owners, but just to put it under their umbrella of state-sponsored protected area. And in the Baños reserves, we're trying to incorporate them into the national park system, not as extensions of national parks, but into the national protected area system. And our biggest threat is not the nationalization now, but mining interests. The Ecuadorian government owns the subsoil rights to all land in Ecuador, so they can concession even our reserves to a mining company, and a mining company could come and drill. And we're having this problem right now in Manduriacu, the reserve that I had to skip over for lack of time, and in the Dracula Reserve as well. And we could have this in the future in Baños as well, in the Baños area reserves. The only way we can get out of it completely is by incorporating our reserves into the national system of protected areas. And it's too late for us to do that in the Dracula Reserve because they already have concessions. And we're fighting with the landowners right now, with the mining companies right now. And it's a very bitter fight, very dirty fight.
A completely unrelated question. What time is it there?
11:30.
Thank you.
That's an easy one.
You wanted to know what time it was.
Huh?
You wanted to know what time it was. 11:30. That was Benny Mercado that we bought the pots from.
So 11:30 at night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let him go to bed.
I really would have enjoyed seeing you all. I wish things were different, but it's nice to see you virtually like this. And thank you again for inviting me to explain something about all the things that have happened as a result of your grants.
Lou, this has been a great experience for us. We got to see some plants and places that we've never even dreamed of, at least speaking for myself. And it looks like you've done yeoman work there, and from mathematics to exploration to botany to genetic research. It's just amazing. It's mind-blowing. So we're glad to be able to help, and we'll continue to be a resource for you, I hope.
Thanks very much. Thanks. I appreciate it. Peter, do you have anything to say about the Orchid Conservation Alliance? Anything you want to say?
Yeah, we'll be funding the purchase of Tabasco sauce in the future. No, I just want to thank you for doing, first of all, giving a great talk, and secondly, for being such an amazing steward of nature.
Well, thank you for being a part of it from the very beginning. You in particular, Peter.
A pleasure.
Okay. Good night to all.
Good night.
Good
night. Thanks.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Does
Oh.
anybody want to see the rest of the plant forum? There are only 11 plants left. Or are you all tired and ready to go home and go to bed?
Yes, why not?
Why not? Okay.